Hello everyone and welcome to another Daily Objective. My co-host today is Josh Dixon from Resurface UK, and we're going to discuss a topic which has to do with loosely around the issue of sex and sexual desire. And just to clarify from the beginning, we say this on any topic, but particularly on this one, A, that's not my expertise, and B, definitely, this is not like the objectivist line on the topic. We don't give the objectivist line on any topic, actually. We're just students of the philosophy, and we try to make our life better and understand the world through the prism of this philosophy. But specifically for this topic, like it's even more difficult to kind of approach it by using the philosophy, but we will try. And also we will try to use Josh's experience as a psychologist. So why talk about this topic? So one of the fields and disciplines that has a lot of power and a lot of, let's say, credibility or a lot of appeal nowadays is evolutionary psychology. So for those of you who are not very familiar, in very, very layman terms, it means that some of the characteristics of our behavior, of our character, and of the things that we want or the things that we don't want, of the things that we desire, of the things that we are afraid, are the result of an evolutionary process. And there's definitely an element of truth to that. Now, what is the issue though? The issue is that quite often, evolutionary psychology is used on a deterministic way. And this is the case specifically when it comes to gender roles and also when it comes to sex. So, for example, there are two ways to view the issue. I will use the most deterministic approach, which is very popular among the, let's say, the manosphere or among people who are very into this approach. So it says that basically men want unlimited access to unlimited sexuality because our monkey brain is wired for spreading our seed as much as possible, whereas women are more into kind of mating up and having someone who can provide good genes, but also can be a provider. That's kind of the one aspect of the deterministic view. But also there is the, let's say, the philosophical view on sex, the view that Ayn Rand supported, which says that basically sex and romantic love and this view, this element of desire is in a way the highest response that we can have to to our values when we see these values mirrored to someone else. And it's basically sex is a celebration of life and a celebration of existence. Now, if you take these two views, they're quite apart. So, Josh, what is happening here? Could it be that the one view, let's say the deterministic biological view, is correct up to some point and the truth is somewhere in the middle? Or is it that the deterministic view is to be tossed away? And again, from your experience as a psychologist, which of these views do you think is closer to the reality of sex?
It's great. The great questions there you've got there, and I'll do my best. I think the first position really relates to a teenage boy. More, in that sense, someone. Let's just take this back a step. Really, what you're talking about is if someone is rooted in only responding emotionally. The sort of emotionalist response, then yeah, if you don't really have much cognitive capacity or rely on your thinking as your means of survival, then you're going to be driven by your emotions. And we know this in all sorts of areas. And there's this term that we use, emotionalism. And I think that applies to sex as well. So you could be someone who has very poor judgment of cause and effect and long-term thinking. And you might therefore think that casual, constant one-night stands with unprotected sex and, shagging as many people as possible, etc., is a really cool thing, and so on, and let that drive you, and then suffer all the consequences of that. then you have the position of someone who takes it, you know, I was very struck by Harry Binswanger talking about in the latest Meeting of the Minds about when he first heard Ayn Rand in a Q&A. She said, you know, she described and talked about how sex is a great thing and one of the highest values and incredibly important, but that we're, as objectivists, we're also chaste. And he was really struck because he said this went against the 60s sort of culture of the time of free love, etc. He said, you've got someone here, and this is typical Rand, someone who is saying sex is great. And what she's really just saying is that sex is so great and so precious that we need to be precious about it. We can't be casual about it. So I think, but you know, to go back to your original question, I think that that first position is only really credible in that very kind of emotionalist angle aspect. And I just remember from my own experience of when I was a teenager, I didn't want to sleep with everyone. You know, there were moments where you thought, wow, I'd love to, whatever, you know, like old boys do, you know, and I'm sure a lot of girls do as well. But we're not driven solely by those kind of evolutionary instincts. And I think this is something that we need to talk about more in terms of evolutionary psychology, is that one of the things that evolved is something called free will. That evolved like every other part of ourselves. It's not some magical element that is bestowed upon us by God or by whatever, or if I was about to say by society, but people who believe that say we don't have any free will. But, you know, the free will is an evolutionary process. And, you know, I'd be fascinated to know like how it came about and how it evolved, and were there degrees of free will in terms of, were there degrees of how the ability to focus the mind, because that's ultimately what free will is. And did the earlier hominids have that? And what were the crosses? Those, you know, I find those questions really fascinating, and it's a real shame that we don't have those questions being asked by the top evolutionary psychologists, because they don't really believe in it.
It's indeed fascinating. And one of the biggest changes that I've seen to myself when I've changed, let's say, my philosophical beliefs, is also on how I view sex and what I find attractive and what I find not attractive.
Yeah.
And this is something, again, someone could say, well, that's like a placebo effect. So here's what the determinists would say. The determinists would say, you still have the same urges, but you kind of suppress them. Whereas I don't think it's that level. It's even at the level of what you almost instinctively find as attractive or desirable, or that you cannot resist. Also, this changes. Which, yeah. And again, it's I don't think it's self-generated, but at some point it becomes like the default. And because you change your premises and your values, then your body reacts to this. But I'll play a bit more here the devil's advocate. And I'm doing this, because these are genuine questions, but also because I think you're dealing with this topic with your professionalism, but also with your, let's say, knowledge in objectivism. Again, as both of us were students, yeah. But I really like your first answer. So I'm going to push you a bit more with some further questions. So someone would say that even though the heroes in Atlas Shrugged and in other of Rand's novels, in a way, there is this almost kind of instinctive reaction to sexuality. And two things come to mind. The one is this super sexually charged scene with Howard Rourke at the quarry. And yeah. Dominic sees him, and it's not only love at first sight, it's desire which cannot be contained at first sight. So there is something physical there. Yes, I know it's a work of art, but still, she doesn't know who this guy is, and yet there is this magnetism from something in Rourke's. But also in Atlas Shrugged, and that's what usually some people who like Rand but are also like evolutionary psychology almost determinists say. They say, well, Dagny is hypergamous. You know, she goes every time she goes for a better man. And here's my thoughts on that. So last week or 2 weeks ago, we had the episode with Gloria on Tommy Laren's video, and we ended up discussing sex. And I said, I think for most of the tenets of evolutionary psychology, there is a rational way to explain them. So for example, I said that there is a rational way to understand why women go for, quote, bad boys. Because the bad boy is the guy who doesn't follow the line. He's the independent thinker. He's the maverick. And, you know, I've posted a tweet with a short video of that, and I got a pushback that says, yeah, but there are many people who go after values passionately, like people who write software, or people who collect comics, or people who, you know, they're good family people. But if that's all that they've got running for them, you're not going to see a queue of women going after them. So could we say that no matter how, you know, philosophically conscious you are with your values and all that stuff, there is also the physical element which has something more, let's say, primal to it? Or is this also can be explained? For example, you know, someone with a well-kept body, someone who we can expect takes themselves serious. So this is also, even this is not purely physical.
Yeah, I'd say I think you answered it right at the end there. Remember, we are an integration of body and mind. As I like what Aristotle says, you know, our consciousness is an aspect of who we are, an aspect of our being. And yeah, well, just think how cognitive sex is really when you go down into it. You meet someone, you see someone across the room. Howard Roark sees Dominique across the room, and she represents everything that he finds attractive. And sounds a bit silly in some ways, but he goes over and speaks to her, and she's just really dumb. Yeah, and she just has this really awful voice, and she's really dumb, and she says all these things that, and immediately the attraction's gone. Yeah. I mean, you just need to see, you know, like hear I mean, a lot of people's response to someone like Amber Heard at the moment is being like, there's this, you know, classic beauty in some ways, and then she talks in other ways, and immediately that sort of projects. What it is so many people project their values onto this other person, and then it's fingers crossed that they live up to that when you first meet them. Not if you know something about them and then they've done great things, that's different. But when you first meet someone and you know that, and then they live up to part of your values, it's such a relief. And
I have this on a non-sexual. I have this on a non-sexual way with my NBA superstar, let's say, boy crushes, because so I'm so disappointed, for example, with their take in politics quite often, that even my admiration for their sports achievement in a way kind of diminishes. I mean, the admiration is still there, but my overall admiration diminishes. So I could very well imagine when it comes to the sexual energy and the sexual, let's say, the sexual magnetism, which is, again, it's one of the most powerful forces in nature, to put it in completely unscientific terms. I really like what you said, that it's like, yes, please, do respond basically to my values and don't let me down. Yeah. Sorry, but continue.
Yeah, and Ayn Rand had a sort of, you know, she had a sort of TV crush on someone on the telly that she talked about and she thought that he would play someone brilliant in her TV series of Atlas Shrugged. I can't remember who, whether it was either Francisco or John Galt or something like that. And then she got to sort of know more about him, and the crush went. Because I don't know the details, but he was probably some kind of wishy-washy, sort of soft lefty champagne socialist, like most, not most, like a large number of that industry are. And you learn these things, and it's very disappointing. So you cannot divorce one from the other.
Right. So what you said reminds me the way I ended up viewing tribalism. And to that, I have to say, I owe a lot to Greg Salmieri, who helped me kind of put it. So I thought that tribalism is kind of this almost biological tendency that we're hardwired. And then if you're conscious, you can get away with it. But now I see it in a different way. It's not that it's hardwired, it's the easy option. So still free will plays a role, because it's different. It's one thing to say I'm hardwired and I'm escaping it, and it's a different thing to say I'm blank but because I'm lazy, I'm going with what other people are doing. So I think the way you describe it with sex, again, not an expert, but the way you said it makes a lot of sense to me. So I want to move to another topic here, which is the issue of casual sex. And actually, question mark, can sex ever be casual? So we had quite recently I don't know how to pronounce, the WAP song by Cardi B. I encourage you, or maybe not encourage you, depending on your taste. If you want to understand what I'm talking about, Google WAP song lyrics and you'll see what I talk about. So that's a very sexually explicit, so to speak, song. One of the most sexually explicit songs. And I've seen three interesting takes. The one take is that's feminist and that's empowering. Because, usually, and also that's kind of the fashion. If a woman does something, it's kind of de facto empowering. Anyway, another view by the conservatives is that this is obscene, this is kind of bad taste. And another thing I've seen by someone else is that the people who react to this are people who don't know what genuine desire is. If you knew what genuine desire is, and if you've been kind of the receiver or the giver, then you would identify with the song. But the song itself gives rise to this question, that are we in a space and in an era and in a culture where sex has become, in a way too casual? And you can see it in two ways. This is liberating, so people can experiment with their sexuality, which is good in terms of finding who you are and what are your sexual desires. But also, does this take away a bit of what it means to be, to have this very beautiful kind of aura of romance? So I don't know if you remember or if you've heard a French song called Je t'aime, which for its time was like super scandalous. There's this. If you read the lyrics, I think they're 10 times more. I don't know what to say spicy. What's a good way to say spicy? Like
charged?
Sorry?
Charged?
Charged. They're 10 times more charged, but in a good way, but yet a bit less explicit. And I saw a tweet some months ago. I don't even remember who wrote that tweet. We said, we think that twerking is this dance, twerking is kind of sexy. It's not 1% of us sexy as a tango dance is. And I think I found this like, wow, this is so true. That quite often, it's what you said with Rand, that sex, because it is so important, and I think Rand says this in the Playboy interview, because it's so important, and because it's so nice, and because it's such a big thing, by trivializing it, it kind of loses its magic. And then people are fed up with sex, or they can't get sexual pleasure. I can get no satisfaction, as the song says. Anyway, I threw too much on the table. So the main question is, can sex be casual and can it be fulfilling? But also pick whichever of these things you want to comment on.
Well, in my experience, all the clients that I've had who have pursued casual sex have never been particularly happy or particularly enjoyed it. And often it's casual sex is the people who are the main players or studs or sluts or whatever these words, that are used to describe that, are never very happy, because it's so much about a chase and never about and a fantasy and never about the reality. So in my experience, I don't see many people ever being particularly happy with casual sex. I don't think it's necessarily that bad a thing, depending on what stage of life you're at, etc. I think it's much when you're experimenting and discovering your own sexuality, say at university stage and stuff. I think that's quite different to, it's a lot sadder if you see someone in their 50s doing that. It just is. It's just, you see someone who's just not happy in themselves, etc. I don't agree that what I've noticed happening, and I think you alluded to towards the end, is actually I don't think people are more promiscuous or casual with sex now than they were, say, in the 60s. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the pill came out in the 60s and there weren't all the STDs that there are now. So I think what's happened is, and I know from the surveys and some of the statistics that the kids nowadays are having far less sex than they did prior, and having, I think the average number of sexual partners for people is still around 3 or 4 in a lifetime, the average. You know, there's some people who have a lot more, and there's some people who are only with one person. And there's a lot of people out there who are asexual as well. So those figures are slightly skewed by that. But I don't think the kids are having more sex or anything. I think what it is that they are more liberal in terms of saying that they're open to the fact that they wouldn't judge someone for doing that. You know, in the same, like all these people out there who are jumping onto BLM and all and LGBT and everything, that what they're saying is, I tolerate this and I'm for it, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be doing it.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
And I think, you know, one of the issues is nowadays, you know, that there's the sexually transmitted diseases that scare people. There has definitely been the negative influence of porn on teenagers, particularly.
At some point, we're gonna have if we agree on the specifics, I think we should have a whole episode, a whole show on the issue of porn, because it's so prevalent and it's so big in discussions on sexuality but yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, and I think so. I don't think that the generationally the kids or the millennials, or what do you want to say now, are more promiscuous, but it's more. So I think what they'd say, and this is the damaging thing I think that comes out of it, is if a friend was, say, had a new girlfriend every twice a week, once a week or anything, you might have been able to say to them, hey, is there something up? You know, are you unhappy here? Are you unable to connect with people? But the judgment, the ability to do that now would be like, hey, don't interfere with him. He's just expressing his sexuality and so on. So, and I think that, you know, that closing down of discussion is the real element here that's difficult. And so instead
of non-judgmentalism, basically.
Yeah, the non-judgmentalism there, or actually it is a form of judgmentalism though, isn't it? It's like, how dare you judge that person? I'm going to jump in here and be the moral savior of that. And that is a real shame. And you saw that happening you see that happening in many areas of mental health, that nowadays you can't even say, hey, maybe there's something wrong here. Now, don't you judge me for my X, Y, and Z. That's just the way I am, etc.
Yeah, or even worse, I was born this way, which is kind of going back to the determinism that we talked earlier. Anyway, unfortunately, we're out of time. But just let me say 2 things. First, someone might take what we said and say, "Oh, you know, you're prudes. That's the new Puritanism." No, again, we're just trying to experiment, not sexually, but with and see. Because exactly sex is important. What we say is not that it's not, please don't confuse it with the conservative argument on sex. This is a kind of a pro-sex, let's say, approach, recognizing, let's say, the existential importance and beauty of sex. And just a scene again that came to my mind, if you want to see a super passionate scene, watch the tango scene from Scent of a Woman with Al Pacino. I rewatched it the other day. Again, quite often you don't need to do twerking, or you don't need to do the WAP lyrics to portray in a dramatic way kind of this tension and this polarity, and it was great. Okay, so our time is up, but for those of you who want more on good ideas and on philosophy, in about 30 minutes at 7 o'clock, the Ayn Rand Center UK is having its weekly web meetup. Today we are joined by Andrew Bernstein, and we discuss the return of the primitive, which is one of the essays in the book that was my first contact with Ayn Rand, the book with the same name, Return of the Primitive, the Anti-Industrial Revolution. So we encourage you to check out at the London Ayn Rand meetup page, click attend, and you will get the link. And I don't know if we probably will also stream it on YouTube or maybe not, but check it out on Meetup and join us. Anyway, thanks so much from me and from Josh to all of you for watching, for commenting, for sharing the show. We appreciate it. We are trying to become better every week, new content. We're going to bring also new people on, and it's going to get even better. Josh, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to
See
see
you,
you.
everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.